Hi, I'm Jeremy. I'm a dungeon master, and while I may not be the most experienced dungeon master out there, I have been DMing for quite a few years now, and I have some tips that I'd like to share with you on getting the most out of your role-playing games. My first tip is to set expectations before you start playing a game. The best way to accomplish this is with a session zero. In a session zero, you and the people you're going to be playing with all get together around a table just as if you were actually going to play a session, but instead you all discuss and come to terms on the kind of game that you want to play. Do you want to play a serious game? Do you want to play something a little bit more comedic? Are there lines that you don't want to cross? How long do you expect to play for? Do you not have a set amount of time in mind? Or are you working with specific time constraints? When will you be regularly meeting? Every week, every 2 weeks? Or are you going to be playing it fast and loose from week to week? These are all questions that are really important to answer, and if you don't answer, they can cause complications down the line. Session zeros are also a great time for everyone to build characters together, to get an idea of what characters the other players will be putting together, and even potentially build some connections between the characters before they meet. While meeting in a tavern or in some other sort of scenario can be a really fun role-playing game experience, not every game has to start that way. And it can be a lot of fun to start out with characters who do know each other, who share a past, either as rivals, friends, lovers, or any permutation thereof. This is really beneficial because, like I said, it gets everyone on the same page. It makes it really clear what everyone is going to be getting out of the game, and it also sets up a foundation for you as the dungeon master, or for your dungeon master if you're a player, to check in with the players, and for each of you really to check in with each other along the course of your game. You want to make sure that everyone's getting as much out of the game as they expected or wanted to, and most importantly, that everyone's having fun. Personally, I think session zeros are some of the most fun sessions in the game. This early on, it feels like so much is possible that it gets everyone really excited and motivated about what the game will hold in the future. My personal tip for this is to come into the session zero already having agreed upon a premise. Know what system you're going to be playing, know at least in general the scope or scale of the campaign, know as much as you can about the world, but don't be worried to leave big open spaces, big question marks that can be answered during the session zero. There are only a few differences that are really irreconcilable when it comes to getting a role-playing group together. Some of that might be people who want to play entirely different genres or entirely different systems, but for the most part, I think just about anything is fair ground, and once you have a group together that's interested in both playing together and in playing a particular system or a particular campaign, getting together for a session zero is a wonderful way to cement that interest and start building that enthusiasm. It is less necessary if you're running an out-of-the-book adventure that's already been published, but the collaborative character building can be not only fun, but useful in just about any game situation. Tip number 2 is to involve your players in the world building. Now, when I say this, I mean to get them as involved with it as possible. Allow them to help you build the world that you're going to be playing in. Again, this is mostly relevant to homebrew adventures and campaigns, but I think there are elements like this you can inject into any adventure or any setting that you choose to play in. The most common way people do this is by allowing people to write their own backstories and having those backstories tie into the world. Doing this bears a couple advantages both in and out of game. In-game, it means that your characters are better tied to the actual world and setting. Since your players will know the world better, they'll be able to create characters that are more connected to the world they're going to be playing in. And out of game, since your players have spent time building this world, coming up with factions or interesting environmental features or names for random things and historical ages, potentially, your players will be a lot more invested in exploring it. Not everything will be fleshed out or explained or answered, and ideally they'll play their character knowing only what their character would know about. You get to have fun revealing that information to the players and characters, and also filling in the gaps or connecting the dots as needed, bringing to life what is a communal creation. Dungeons & Dragons and role-playing games in general tend to be about communal storytelling. By building the world in this way up front, you're getting started on the right foot before the game even really gets going. Personally, I've done this more and more for new games and adventures that I've chosen to run. It's not the right choice every single time, but I've never regretted it when I have done it. Not only is it actually a ton of fun, but it even makes a little bit less work for you as the dungeon master. You probably have quite a lot to juggle already, So having some of the world building taken off your plate, just a little bit of it, means that your burdens are lessened before the start of the game. I tend to find that a DM has the most work to do, the most world building to do, if you're a planner like me, up front at the start of a campaign or the start of a new adventure. So finding ways to reduce that is great. It means we can get to actually playing the game faster, and I don't have to juggle as much time or as many projects before in the lead up to the game. Special tip for you here is to use world building games that actually do this for you and give you mechanics and systems by which to build these interesting worlds. All of the games I'm about to mention are linked below in the description if you want to check them out. The first one is The Quiet Year. This is available on DriveThruRPG. This is about a single, smaller community. It's great to build a starting town or maybe a frontier settlement or a barbarian tribe or something similar. It's a map drawing game. It's got a really small scale focus. You don't need to draw well for this to be worthwhile. It's a really great system that goes pretty fast. Perfect to fit into a session 0 like we were just talking about. Then there's a couple games by Ben Robbins, who is a great indie game designer that I'd like to recommend. One is Kingdom. Kingdom can be about as large or small as interests you. You can scale it really up if you want to build an entire empire, or make it smaller and focus on a small individual town or city if you'd like. Microscope goes even bigger than Kingdom. Microscope is about creating the epic history of a world. And here you're really creating a timeline of ages past with events and characters throughout, and you get to do quite a bit of role-playing scene work, kind of like Fiasco, throughout the course of this game. If you use something like Microscope to build the history of your world, you can then choose any point within that timeline you guys have created to form a campaign. Like I mentioned, these are all linked below, so if they're interesting to you, definitely check them out. I know that there are some really great Microscope Let's Plays on YouTube as well that you can look up. Tip number 3 is a rather simple one, and it's use music. Music adds a ton to your game. It adds atmosphere and ambiance. It can get your players to be more engaged and involved in the story. It's a really great way to set a scene, and I'm sure every DM who's played music has had moments when a music cue has happened perfectly in the right moment that they weren't expecting, and that is just such a cool and satisfying experience. I tend to use either Spotify or YouTube for this. Spotify is great if you have a persistent soundtrack you want to keep turning back to. YouTube, I tend to queue up different songs or different mixed playlists that I tap into for certain kinds of sequences if I know I'm going to be jumping in tone or environment, from a tavern where I maybe want generic fantasy music playing to a sewer crawl where horror music might be more appropriate. I highly recommend that if you do this, you use instrumental music and you be careful with lyrics. Lyrics I find very distracting, both as a DM and as a player, and even instrumental music, I try to shy away from well-known movie scores or video game scores because at least the players I play with have a tendency to, while they're sitting, pick out what the scores that are playing are, as opposed to just engaging in the game and allowing it to fade into the background. The point of all this is to try to get your players more involved, to make the games more engrossing and engaging, not to take them out of it because you happen to be playing something from Legend of Zelda. Tip number 4 is to keep your players in the spotlight. Make them feel cool, special, heroic, and powerful, not just in relation to the world around them, but also in relation to each other. When you're planning the sessions to come, make sure you're planning opportunities in which they can shine. Make sure you're writing moments in which you know they might have an opportunity to do really cool things. And in the moment, if they're gonna try to do something awesome, well, maybe just let them roll for it and see what happens. There's nothing wrong with going off the books here and there to cater to a really awesome moment. More than anything, that's what your players are going to remember. They're not going to remember you nitpicking over the rules and not allowing them to do cool stuff. In fact, if they do remember that, that's the opposite of what you want to have happen. In addition, it's really important that you keep the spotlight moving around. One character may just happen to succeed more than the others. If you keep focusing on them or keep feeding adventure after adventure or encounter after encounter, or that character is exceedingly effective, far more effective than all the other characters on board, that's not random happenstance, that's a failing on your part as a DM. When that happens, don't take it hard on yourself, don't blame yourself, just make sure to take steps so that in the future, all the players, all the characters get moments to feel awesome and feel powerful. Not only does this kind of thing keep your players happy and engaged, but it makes your game unique. You can take an out-of-the-box adventure and come up with moments like this or tailor moments that already exist to better fit the players and characters that you're dealing with. Write in their backstory. Have some rumor going around town about something really cool that your players did a few months back. And show both your players and the characters that they play that they are valued parts of your game. If you can do that both mechanically in the challenges that you set up and orchestrate and narratively in the story that you weave, I think you'll find yourself with an awesome, very engaging game of Dungeons & Dragons or any other role-playing system. Tip number 5 ties into the last one, and it is let your players fail. Players don't want to fail. They don't want to fail missions, they don't want to fail combats, they don't want to fail anything. They don't even want to fail rolls. I totally understand. When I'm a player, I don't want to fail. I want to succeed and do the cool thing. But I would argue that failure actually hides the path to some of the most interesting and compelling roleplay experiences that you can have at a gaming table. As a DM, it's easy to get into this mindset of trying to help the players. Now, I don't think being a DM is about being combative, but if you go out of your way to help your players, I think that can be equally harmful to the game experience. You know that the players don't want to fail and succeed, and so I think most DMs tend to lean towards making the scenario a little bit easier on your players, making it more forgiving. Maybe you had reinforcements for the monsters they're fighting, but they're getting their asses kicked. So you hold back the reinforcements so the encounter is more balanced and fair. Prioritizing balance over a compelling narrative experience, I think, starts to lead you down a really bad road as a dungeon master, because then you're essentially removing the stakes for your players. They might not know it, but you're taking failure off the table and cutting off a whole swath of narrative opportunities and developments that could be really cool and make your game very memorable. When your characters or your players fail, it can lead to completely unexpected plot developments, things that neither your players nor maybe even you as a dungeon master were prepared for. I had this happen just recently to me in a game that I run, and it led to some of the best and coolest role-playing that I've seen at a table. When the players finally recovered from it, it was a heroic and exciting moment. Not only did that give them more narrative fodder for their characters to engage with and roleplay, but as players, they were now feeling the scenario, feeling the tension of having failed, and they were excited to stick it back in the enemy's face, or at least complete their mission. And like I said, failure can lead to really interesting areas. Let's say they're defeated by a bunch of monsters. Well, that doesn't mean that they're killed. Maybe the monster's captured. Now all of a sudden the narrative has gone in a different way. They might meet someone who's a fellow prisoner who they might not have met before. This could be a really cool opportunity for an NPC. Or maybe they get to orchestrate a breakout and prison escape. That can be a ton of fun at the table. Or maybe by failing, they are just in the right place to hear certain kinds of information that they've been trying to get to for a long time. But nobody thinks twice about spilling the beans around slaves. After all, what could they possibly do with that information? Beyond the places that failure can lead, failure changes the color of the rest of your game. Every failure that your player characters endure make all the successes that much more meaningful and that much more satisfying. You still have to be fair. I don't think it's great to force your players into failure. However, I would recommend, if your players really aren't used to this, force the failure onto them. You don't have to make it obvious, but you can put them in a really difficult position. Press them hard until they fail. The first time they fail will be the hardest time and the least pleasant time. Make sure that the possibility of failure is clear in and out of character so that they know what they're going into. If your players are anything like mine, they will not be happy. They will not like this. This is a risky thing to do, and hopefully you have good relationship with your players so that they trust you to see this through. Once they fail and recover from that failure and go through the interesting roleplay and character development that can come from it, they'll finally realize that failure is not the end of the story. Failure is in many ways a new beginning. Never be afraid to lose the reins on your campaign, and make sure your players aren't afraid to fail. All right, and tip number 6, try new things. This is a pretty simple one. One of the worst things you can do for your game is to get static as both a dungeon master and in terms of where you're pulling inspiration from. Never be afraid to experiment and try something new. Try a different kind of role-playing system. Try out a different set of rules. Do session zeros if you don't normally. Try a political adventure if you typically only run combat adventures. You and your players might not know what you actually enjoy most if you don't sample all the different pieces. If there are types of combat that you shy away from, like mounted combat or underwater underwater combat, give yourself and the players at the table an opportunity to explore and experience it. It'll be complicated at first, but once you get into it, I think you'll pick it up faster than you expect. And if it's not working for you, change the rules. Do it in the way that you want it to be done, in a way that is exciting and invigorating for you and your game. If you find that most of your games occur in the same kind of biome, you have a generally Western fantasy set around forests and mountains and the like, maybe try something completely different. Pull out a completely different kind of setting. Try a desert or an Arctic tundra environment. If all your encounters are simple, maybe try complicated encounters with multiple steps and traps involved, or timers and triggers throughout the combat scenario. If you never use random encounters, maybe try that. Maybe what you need is simpler combat. Consider the gaps in what you present and try it. It's very possible that you might be not adding something to your game that could be a ton of fun for everyone involved just because you haven't thought to or haven't done so in the past. Trying new things like this not only makes your game more interesting by adding variety, but it also keeps your players engaged. And that's been a running theme throughout this video. Getting more out of your game starts with getting everyone at the table more involved and invested in what's going on in the game world. That counts for both you as a dungeon master and all the players that are there. One great way to explore doing this is to use the DM's Guild. If you don't know what the DM's Guild is, the DM's Guild is the Dungeon Masters Guild. It's a website ran by D&D and Drive-Thru RPG, One Bookshelf, the company behind that, where creators put together homebrew D&D content and make it available, some for free and some for sale. And that includes a wide variety of supplements and resources you can use. Custom classes, subclasses, and new items that your players might acquire, or adventures for you all to go on. Matt Mercer's Gunslinger is a classic example. That subclass is available on the DM's Guild for free for you to download, and maybe one of your players will want to explore that. If you've been watching my video, you know that I, of course, have created my own supplements on the DM's Guild, but there are plenty of other ones worth considering too. For example, there are a couple really cool subclasses like the College of the Opera and the Cartographer subclass. The College of the Opera is a Bard subclass, and the Cartographer subclass is a Ranger subclass. I'm linking all of these and everything I'm mentioning here also in the description if you want to check them out. Beyond that, there are also the Homebrew Adventures or other expansive supplements. One of the most popular ones right now is Hammond's Harvesting Handbook. This is an entire rule set for allowing your players to harvest parts from the monsters they defeat. And not only that, it also goes into crafting from those gathered parts. In addition, there's Balduran's Guide to Kingdom Building, which is an extremely comprehensive set of story-centric, story-first rules for kingdom building and large-scale warfare in Dungeons & Dragons. If you want that sort of thing to be a part of your games, it also comes with 9 adventures for you to explore. All of these are linked below, but there's plenty more to look through on the DM's Guild. I highly recommend you check it out. I think it's a great way for you to get a lot more out of your D&D games. I hope these tips are helpful to you and that they help you get the most out of your time spent at the gaming table. If you want more videos like this about D&D or other nerdy imaginary things, make sure you subscribe to my channel. I make a ton of videos about everything from writing to D&D to LARPing to a whole bunch of other subjects. I'd love to have you along for the ride, and I wish you the best in your role-playing games.